When you know it in your gut, you know that something can happen and then it needs to happen, do it anyways. Find your way to do it.
Welcome to this week's As Unexpected podcast, when we talk to C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists about how they lead into the future when the future generally goes as unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and my own professional experience has made me a believer that it's not how you show up when all goes as planned, but it is how you show up when things go as unplanned. Given all of their experiences, each of our guests has become very attuned to the fact that the future is not to be predicted. My hope is that this podcast can help all of you become better leaders by building the core leadership capabilities for leading in an uncertain world. Again, everybody, to the As Unexpected podcast. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and today's guest, I've never met in person, although she lives just a few miles away. And now we're definitely going to meet in person and share stories because her work really is foundational to community well-being. And if there's anything more important in the world today, it can't be above community well-being. She's so committed to everything in her own community and lifting up those in need. Melanie Woolman, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the As Unexpected podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me. I'm flattered to be here.
Yeah, well deserved for sure. I'm honored to be here and in company with you. Would you mind just starting off giving our listeners a sense of who you are, what your background is, and your current role?
Yes, my origin story. I've known that I've wanted to work in a nonprofit since I was in 6th grade.
Wow.
I had a teacher. Yes, I had an amazing teacher. And one of our assignments was to, read through a series of articles, gather information from it, and then summarize, right? Like that was the skill building that we were supposed to learn. And I'm sure that I did learn that, But there were 3 sets of articles that we could choose from. One of them was on animal testing. One of them was on poverty. And I don't even remember what the 3rd set of articles was. But I picked up the articles on poverty. And I read that there are people in this world that, live on the equivalent of $1 US a day. And my little brain just exploded, right? Like I couldn't get over that. I still can't get over it, honestly. Those statistics unfortunately have not moved much in the last decade or so. And that was it. That's what did it for me. I decided I've got 2 degrees, political science and international relations. Thought I was like going to join the Peace Corps, all the whole 9 yards, right? Go save the world. And I went to a Jesuit institution. They've got a very particular style of learning and education. And so that is to learn and be for and with others. And so I had this really amazing opportunity to go to El Salvador and learn from the people there, learn about quite frankly, the damage that the United States and other Western worlds or, other Western countries did. And that was the summer right before I sailed on semester at sea. So I had that experience. And then, I sailed on the fall 2012 voyage. And I realized, quite frankly, the damage that could be done by, folks from the United States or, again, these sort of Western worlds going into a country and saying, here, let me solve all your problems for you. And so I pivoted, right? Instead of doing the Peace Corps, I decided to join AmeriCorps, right? Which is like the Peace Corps, but domestic.
Yeah.
And I did a year of volunteer service at United Way of Weld County.
Wow. There you go.
And here I am 11 years later as president and CEO.
And for those who are listening and not watching the YouTube version, just behind Melanie is the sign that says United Way of Weld County. Started there in AmeriCorps, is now the president CEO of United Way of Weld County. That is phenomenal. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that something happened in 6th grade that determined their life, passion, and career.
I remember the moment. I was sitting against a bookshelf. It was so foundational for me. And I'd been exposed to things far earlier than that, right? My parents were always very connected to the rest of the world and what was going on, but it was an important moment for me and it shaped my life trajectory.
Yeah. Well, maybe I have to rethink the origin of my story because it was in 6th grade when we were asked to write a report on a country, and I chose Botswana. and got fascinated with the country. I've never been there, but I've been to lots of countries now. And maybe it was what sparked my interest. I always claim it was my study abroad program in undergrad, but maybe it was earlier. Maybe it was earlier. So, Melanie, the theme of this podcast is about leadership, and it's about how we show up when things don't go as we expect them to go. I firmly believe that is the foundation of leadership. It's easy to show up when, hey, it all went as we thought it would. And I'm guessing in your current role there and past roles, as you've risen up the ranks there, you've faced many times when things didn't go as you expected them to go. Can you share a story or two about what did go as unexpected and how you showed up for yourself and those around you?
Yeah, absolutely. There are many instances, but ironically, thinking back on it, I think they all kind of culminate up and into one moment for me. I'll be honest with you, I had to be convinced to apply for the president and CEO role. My mentor actually convinced me. I applied like 4 days before the application period closed. And so I think I had a bit of a feeling, right, being an internal candidate, of just how big of a role this is going to be, right? And, have that a little bit of that imposter syndrome where like, can I really do this? But I applied and, I went through the process, got the role. And the first few weeks of it was great, like living in cloud nine, and I had an amazing predecessor who actually had been the president and CEO for 33 years.
Wow.
Longer than I've been alive. That was really hard for me to wrap my mind around, And again, I sort of felt the weight of that and, stepping in, everyone's like, oh, you got big shoes to fill. And, my response to that always was, well, I don't intend to fill those shoes. Right. I'm a different person. And I think that's why the board selected me and chose me. Right. And, so we had a nice transition period and, all was sort of smooth sailing. Right. And then I knew the parts of the organization that I wanted to dig a little bit into more because our prior leader's style was not necessarily to loop everybody into everything. Even as an executive team member, I didn't necessarily know the full state of the fundraising department or the finance team or, those kinds of things. And so I did my question asking and, did my digging. And I had a sense, like I said, that, there was a few changes that needed to be made. And I could not have fathomed, even being an internal candidate, just how sort of behind the times the organization was. And really, unfortunately, in our finance department, just how strained we were. I transitioned into the CEO role about midway through the pandemic, right? So in 2022. And so we had a, big influx of COVID funds and our organization size literally doubled, or nearly doubled. Yeah, we went from a $4 million organization to an $8 million organization. And our vice president of finance at the time is a great guy, truly, like just a great human. And he was in over his head. And I remember there was one Saturday, we figured this out. And we're like, okay, we'll pivot, we'll adjust. There's luckily no misuse of funds or anything like that. Just gotten kind of behind on things. And he ended up leaving the organization. And so my treasurer, who are of the board at the time, our chief operating officer and myself just like went into the finance office, one Sunday afternoon. We're like, all right, we're going to figure it out. It took 2 years and $750,000 to fix the problems that he caused. And I also remember going into one of my interviews saying, the thing that I need support in, I think most is the financial aspect of the organization, right? I need a really strong VP of finance. It's the thing that I'm least comfortable with, all the things. And here I was, completely out of my element, a new CEO who's in our early 30s. And I just had this sinking feeling like, my goodness, how unfair this is. And what is the organization going to do? And is this my fault? And then, I spiral and start thinking about the community and how important our organization is in this community. We are a bit of a unique United Way in that we actually provide a lot of direct service programming. Most United Ways don't, but we run a shelter here in town. I mean, it is life-saving work. And so, my, for 6 months, it was an absolute nightmare. And it was the first 6 months of my role, right? When I'm supposed to be out and about meeting people and meeting with donors and selling, casting my vision, all of those things, and was left with this, like I said, this mess that I couldn't have even fathomed. And the only way that I knew how to get through it was to be vulnerable and share with my board everything that we came across. And let me tell you, those are not my most favorite board meetings that I've ever had.
Wow, for a new CEO to face all that. So I'm going to ask what could be a question that you may not want to answer, but you said I could, you like tough questions.
I do.
So in my case, running a nonprofit board, we have a voluntary board. They are fiduciaries, and they know our financial situation all of the time. Was this the case? Was your board are they supposed to be fiduciaries? And if so, it sounds like they may have been remiss in their fiduciary responsibility.
I don't have all of the background behind how we got to, this point. But I had come in, and again, I think there was a lot of sort of passes given in this time period, right? Because COVID, we were at the height. I mean, truly, like when things, the dominoes kind of all fell in 2022, 23, but it culminated before that, right? And there was a lot of passes given, a lot of empathy and understand. You double your organizational revenue, and it's okay if we miss financials for a month or, here or there, that kind of thing. But it had been months. They were getting some statements here and there, which I think helped keep them, looking good. Our cash was in a great spot, so they're looking for the things that, our reserves were fine. Our cash was in a great spot. So, they're looking for the big things. And there was a lot of turning of the, one too many free passes given. And I will say, I think that they knew pretty quickly, once our treasurer and I really dug, that Sunday afternoon, we're sitting there thinking we're going to solve all the problems. I think she understood what, what was happening really at that point.
So it must have been on your operating budget side. Your operating budget side was not strong.
No.
That was, no. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And yeah. He just, the poor guy, again, lovely human, didn't understand like cash versus accrual-based accounting.
Yeah.
So we're talking like basics here, So anyways, so I think that the board perhaps made a few missteps, but, I think by showing up and being vulnerable, they responded in a way that I can't even imagine. Like, it was incredible. I'm convinced, the greatest board on earth. And I think that's maybe not typical to hear from a nonprofit executive, especially when my bylaws dictate that our board is a minimum of 20 people.
Oh my goodness.
I've got a big board, and they were phenomenal. Right. And so, but it was scary, it was scary to be vulnerable like that and say, look, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need help. And this organization needs help if we're going to continue doing this really, really important work in the community. And the way they responded and just so wholeheartedly supported me was more than I could have ever asked for.
Can we explore this idea of vulnerability a bit more? It's clearly a topic that's been talked about in leadership for a few decades now. And I wouldn't say people of my generation are great at it. I think maybe your generation is showing up better with that in mind. Nonetheless, I try to practice it. I'm not saying I don't. I most certainly do. I'm just saying generationally, I think there might be some differences. But for you, young, new, claiming not great financial acumen, that this is something you need. So how do you show up with that vulnerability, but at the same time, instill that confidence? I'm going to solve this, and I'm still the right leader. Like, how do you do that?
Oh, man. I don't know that. I don't know if I have an answer to that. except for to remember why I was hired. And I think that that's really important, right? Because I've learned from and really appreciate the leaders that hire people that are smarter than them, right? My chief operating officer is way better at me at operational things. Our communications team, our now amazing finance team, right? They are way better at those things than I am. And my strength lies in casting the vision for what our community can be, how we can show up for people and help lead in that direction. And so for me, keeping the people that we're serving in mind and keeping humanity right at the core there, casting that vision and saying, look, these are the details, right? Finances and bringing consultants and fixing books and, all that kind of thing. Like those are the details. But to keep the board, I think, focused on who we're serving and why and the impact, the ultimate vision, that was the only way that I knew how to do that. I suppose was to lean into my strength. But I'll be honest, Scott, like it took like a not a hard conversation, but I was having a hard time. And it took a few conversations with my board chair and chair-elect to really remind me like why I was hired. I started off saying I've got a little bit of that imposter syndrome and, that idea of like leaning in, right? That's not easy for me. And so it took reminding and some of that confidence building. And I still have to be reminded of that at times.
Yeah.
But to keep that top of mind, it was helpful for me.
Yeah. And I ask you only in on my own self-reflection that this is something I have to show up with as well. And to your point, you've got to have great people surrounding you. You just have to. As a CEO, the mistake or the misconception some people have is, well, we must know it all. And it's kind of just the opposite. We're surrounded by people who know it all. And our job is to bring it together and cast that vision. And we may have grown up with an organization or whatever and know part of it pretty well. But then I found the challenge is you got to step out of that.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We're no longer responsible for managing that area.
Yep. Oh, yeah. I had a hard pet. So I oversaw the programming. So, probably 6.5 of the $8 million was what I had overseen. And it was stepping away from that. But honestly, I hired somebody that was exactly opposite of me to backfill the position that I had vacated. And he's perfect for it. And I trust him, and that's how you get through.
That's awesome. And a powerful story. So thanks for sharing that. This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program for college students and adults on career breaks, sabbaticals, or retired, interested in learning and exploring the world together. Learn more about the Lifelong Learner program at www.semesteratc.org. My circumstance was the same and different. I was an internal candidate, but there was no broad search. There was a transition that just needed to occur internally. But I also at the same time empathize with, you got to come up, those people who were your peers now report to you.
Yeah.
And that's a dynamic that you have to manage as well. How was that transition for you, where from peer to supervisor?
It was right. People don't typically believe me when I say this. So the person that convinced me to apply for the role, right, was my mentor. And he and I were the last two final candidates. And we were both internal candidates. And
the plot thickens.
But we're opposite of each other. And he's now my chief operating officer, right? And I credit so much of this to him. He cares about our mission and he cares about supporting women and as well. That has been part of his life's mission, is to support women and building them up, which is, I credit so much of his mentorship to where I am now. But that was kind of weird. And it still is weird here and there. And we've been able to joke around about it, which I'm really, really grateful for. But I think everybody was convinced, oh, he'll stick around for 6 months and then leave. But he hasn't. And I'm so, so grateful for that. And again, it's just that testament to when you find the right people and surround yourself and are vulnerable, right? To stay and have that conversation with him and be like, hey, this is weird for me too. To have those vulnerable conversations, it just makes it easier, to get through the tough moments.
Yeah, and this is also a great thing for young professionals to listen to and really get their head around, that there's no exact path or exact dynamic that happens in the workforce and in your own career trajectory. It's not, well, I do it for this long and I get this job, and I do it for this long and I get this job. It's all unknown. You embrace opportunity. So actually your story is so brilliant for people to really listen to what Melanie's saying. This is how life happens.
Yeah. Oh, totally unexpected. I'm from Rochester, New York. I thought I moved to Colorado for a year, move back home, and here I am 11 years later, president CEO, have a husband, 2 kids. It's not at all what I was expecting, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
There you go. Well, Melanie, this is a great transition point. I've got a quote for you that I'm going to read. And as I shared with you, I brought the book, but the bookmark fell out of the book. So now I have to read the quote from my phone, just so our listeners know. The book is called Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman. And the quote goes like this: ideas are never merely ideas. We are what we believe. We find what we go looking for. And what we predict comes to pass. What's your reflection on that quote?
There's 2 things that, sort of come top of mind to me. And this is, I think, my world sort of colliding and figuring out that, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And this is going to sound like I have unsupportive parents, and that's not true. They're amazing. They're amazing humans, right? But so I remember telling them I was going to go to this Jesuit, Canisius College in Buffalo. And they were like, no, you're not. And I went. And then I told them I was doing a semester at sea, and they were like, no, just do a normal study abroad program. And I went on semester at sea. And then I told them, I think I'm going to move to Colorado for a year, do this AmeriCorps thing. And they're like, oh, I don't know if you should do that. And I did it. And then, even in applying for the president and CEO role, right, they're like, oh, that's really big, all the right, big shoes to fill, all the things. And here I am. So I think unintentionally, I've kind of done that my whole life, willed it to be. But what's more important there is not, my story in it. It's how I've used that. And I'll use an example of my work here at United Way. So HUD, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, has contracts for housing and homelessness work. And every state has these contracts. And they're broken out into geographies, right? So basically a specific geography gets a pot of money and you divvy it out to do housing and homelessness work. Well, in the state of Colorado, there's only 3 regions. There's the 7-county metro Denver area, which includes Boulder, and then Colorado Springs and El Paso County. And then the whole rest of the state was a region. And so for those of you listening, I'm air quotes, right? Quote unquote region.
Yeah.
And we in Northern Colorado are growing at a crazy rate. Weld County is one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. Windsor and then the Carbon Valley, again, here in Weld County, are always neck and neck with the fastest growing towns and areas in the state. And we needed more than that. And so I got onto this governing board that oversaw, again, this 56 county region, quote unquote region, that was trying to divvy up the time, like $3 million across 56 counties. It was just crazy. And I realized at the time that the agency that was in charge of doing this was not following the rules and regulations. The board, 100% of the people on the board, except for myself, worked at agencies were funded by that money. Was not okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is it. We're not doing this. I want us to be our own continuum of care, is what these regions are called. And everyone's like, you can't do that. HUD is consolidating continuums of care. They're not making new ones, right? And so this makes sense. Maryland has like 18 continuums of care. And Maryland's tiny. Our Weld County is half the size of the state of New Jersey, right? So for folks that don't understand just the scope and scale that is out here in Colorado. And I was like, yeah, great. That makes sense for Maryland. That does not make sense for Colorado, especially northern Colorado. And, for 6 months, I got the runaround with HUD down in Denver and HUD headquarters. And it just so happened that our state congressman was coming to United Way Weld County, and he just for a visit. And our CEO asked if there was anybody that had information to share. And I was like, I don't have information to share, but I do have a request of him. And so I asked him, and I painted the picture for him, right? Let him know of our situation and that Weld and Larimer counties, so Greeley and Fort Collins, wanted to be our own region, right? And I explained why and the impact for the 54 other counties and, all the things, right? And, of course, 3 days later, I finally get a response from HUD headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
But, people, they told me, they're like, it can't happen. It can't be done. It cannot be done. And I was like, yes, it can. I know that it can. But it was only, so ironically, we were designated here, our 2-county region, as a continuum of care January 9th of 2020.
Congratulations.
So thank you. Right before the pandemic. And it was only the 3rd time ever that HUD had done that. And that's not to talk about, I'm determined, I'm stubborn, all the things. But the reason that is important and why I sort of willed it to be is because, 15 days later or whatever, I mean, it was even prior to that, right? But the world shut down, and we were able to get millions and millions of dollars directly into Weld and Larimer counties for this homelessness, this pandemic response work to keep people experiencing homelessness safe. And that saved lives, countless lives. And that is really, really important. And so often I feel like young people hear, that, oh, maybe not. Maybe you shouldn't do that. It can't be done. And there's something to be said for when you know it in your gut, that something can happen and then it needs to happen, do it anyways. Find your way to do it. It change the world.
We're going to have to do another podcast. There's just so much in what you just said. I'm sorry to have to schedule a episode 2 with you, but just to recall for our listeners, we are what we believe to be. And what Melanie is saying is she is someone who is so committed to her work, so committed to her constituents that she yes, you willed it to be, but you found the way. You persisted based on your mission. And that are such powerful words there. Melanie, we're about at the end. Thank you for your time. I would have one last request of you. If you have that one piece of advice to anybody who's listening, what might it be? One piece, one nugget. You shared so many already, but if there's that last thing you want to finish with.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable, right? And whether it's in your personal life and your professional life, I wish that I had been more vulnerable in both my personal and professional life much sooner than I was forced to be, in this situation. But when you can be that and be your authentic self, you find this place and space that you're supposed to be.
Love it. That's an exclamation point. Thanks so much for your time today, Melanie.
Thank you, Scott.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program where students visit 10 countries on 3 continents, all while taking 3 to 4 college classes through Colorado State University. See course offerings and upcoming voyage itineraries at www.semesteratsea.org. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the As Unexpected podcast. The viewpoints and opinions of featured guests do not necessarily represent those of the Institute for Shipboard Education or Semester at Sea. Hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends, and remember, be curious, be compassionate, be courageous. That's what it takes to lead as unexpected.